Is this a Wrongisode? I think it is! Today I'm getting into the state of Nintendo, which is a topic upon which everybody always agrees always about everything. I'll see you on the other side of the theme song. So I, like most gamers, grew up with Nintendo. Super Mario Land, Donkey Kong Land, Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Star Fox 64, Ocarina of Time, these are all huge parts of my childhood. And yes, I never had a Super Nintendo. Not that I was too young. It's a long story. So it wasn't until high school, when a friend got through to me with Skies of Arcadia and Final Fantasy 9 and 7, that I finally started to see the world of gaming outside of Nintendo. This sent me on a long, difficult, and necessary journey out of fanboyism so I could start to view Nintendo with a bit more perspective. Ultimately, Nintendo is a company that I adore, have great respect for, and am also extremely wary of. The biggest point that I feel like I have to stress right off the top is that although companies present themselves as single entities, and although in some ways they are, it is important to remember that Nintendo can still have conflicting priorities. Iwata is not Miyamoto, is not Onoma, is not Sakurai, is not Reggie, despite their similarities. And I do see Nintendo's existence as a company as a struggle of conflicting ideologies. They take risks at the same time as they play it safe. They are trailblazers, and they are also hopelessly stuck in the past. They create some of the most clearly, for lack of a better term, pure examples of game design, and they also try to milk huge wads of cash out of garbage, sometimes charging consumers for technology fixes, or what are essentially proofs of concepts rather than completed works. But to be honest, these dichotomies reflect a lot of the disconnect that happens when an industry has to present an art form in its infancy, like video games, as something that's already been mastered, which it hasn't. So in a lot of cases, I don't blame these companies. Anyway, for all the examples of Nintendo's stubbornness and greed, I feel like some of its key members can share the frustration with capitalism's hold on art that I can feel sometimes, although that's obviously just a guess, and if they do feel that way, they could never say it publicly. Nintendo's greatest successes have stemmed from when they recognize the time and deliberate reconsideration it takes to make the trailblazing games that they have made. This is why I was actually pretty excited when I heard the news that Zelda for Wii U was going to get delayed. As I mentioned, I know it's sometimes difficult to discern Nintendo voices from each other, especially when messaging tends to be so deliberately vague from them, but I think that paying attention to the way that Onoma in particular has always talked about Zelda game design reveals something about the subtleties of his word choices. Zelda is a series that gained an incredibly strong 3D adventure framework through Ocarina of Time, so when the series faltered with games like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, it wasn't always clear to see what was missing because it was built on such a strong foundation. Therefore, when Skyward Sword forced Onoma to rethink the relationship between controls and environment on account of that game actually being designed for motion controls, I think it sparked something in him. Now, Skyward Sword has its own problems with a lack of focus and being held back by primitive motion controls, but I do think there is that clear spark of inspiration that can be tracked through Link Between Worlds and the way that Onoma talks about the design of the new Zelda game. And now this is where I feel confusion can set in. It's something of a mistake in my view to get too caught up in the particulars of the local gaming landscape. Who's making what kind of money, who's winning, how many games are coming out how quickly. This, again in my view, is one of the bigger drawbacks to capitalism being the driving force in game creation. Nintendo needs to make money to stay alive and continue making games. Any studio does. And while the urgency and competition that this breeds is a positive force in my view, it also encourages negative trends, like companies greedily sticking to a formula in order to cash in more regularly, or companies offering bonuses for arbitrary things like high review scores, or companies forces games to be released before they're ready. I believe that that last example happens all the time, beyond the very obvious buggy examples that we all like to talk about. Usually only very rich companies like Blizzard or Nintendo can afford to choose to keep a game in development for as long as it needs to be. Although, one further digression, I don't think that a long development time necessarily equates to an excellent game. I think we have a lot of examples of that. Anyway, what was I talking about? Nintendo, I think? Right. The point is that I'm encouraged by the fact that Nintendo allowed Onoma to take more time with Zelda to develop the ideas that he wants to, although it's very bad timing on the landscape of the Wii U's financial state. It's a decision that recognizes the need for long-term investment in making excellent and impactful games, and one that, in conjunction with Nintendo's really strong, if infrequent, recent first-party work, bodes well for something of a Nintendo renaissance. Now, I'm not sure that I'm sticking with my original prediction that the new Nintendo console is going to be called the new Super Nintendo, but I do feel as if Nintendo recognizes that it's time to return to being a straight-up gaming company. Or, at the very least, they're going to learn how to try to properly parse their audience. The original Wii was an unfortunate step back in good game design, but it was successful in bringing video games to a whole new audience. I think this is a good thing. We all started as casual gamers. But it did lead Nintendo to forget not only the gamers that made them, but what they were actually good at. This arrogance was reflected in the launch of the Wii U, when Nintendo seemed to believe that whatever they did, people would just lap up. It reminds me of the hubris that Sony had when they launched the PlayStation 3. And while I believe that the Wii U is a wonderful system, I think that Nintendo is standing behind it the same way they did when the original 3DS launched, which is to say, hesitantly. They seem to be aware of their situation and their mistakes, but they can't kibosh the system yet because it would be a PR and economic nightmare. And to be fair, the Wii U's gamepad does a much better job at creating interesting and unique gaming experiences than the Wii ever did. But Game & Wario was underappreciated, and Mario Party 10 is fine but forgettable, and Star Fox for Wii U can't carry that weight all by itself when it ostensibly comes out later this year, so where does Nintendo stand? That's why I'm saying it feels like when the 3DS first launched. When that happened, Nintendo called it its third pillar to stand alongside its home console and its Game Boy line. But when the system was a giant success, that third pillar line faded into obscurity. It was a backup plan. The prospect of the Wii U gaining late success sort of feels like Nintendo's backup plan, as weird as that sounds. So my current guess is that Nintendo's playing a very slow, strategic, kinda context-dependent game. They seem to be returning to the process of letting the development of their big games breathe so as to re-establish trust with their core gamers. Mario Kart 8 and Super Smash Bros. Have already helped with this. But as this happens, they seem to be setting up a multi-pronged attack in which they enter the ugly, greedy world of free-to-play mobile development and also try to recapture the hearts of gamers like me who grew up with them with whatever the Nintendo NX is. They are trying to be everything to everybody while appearing just to have one single directive. They did a very bad job of this with the Wii, but I think they're slowly gaining their footing. And yeah, it's a little messy, but I can't blame them in some ways. How else do you stand up after so many mistakes in a world in which you need to appear flawless in order to be financially viable? In case it wasn't clear, I don't believe that just because something is the way that it is means that it should be the way that it is. Like, capitalism is a fine system, but why the crap is it the only one? It's just not well suited to the pace of good game development, not without compromise from both the companies and consumers. I sympathize heavily with both sometimes. So, the question is, did the financial failure of the Wii U teach Nintendo enough real lessons? It's so hard to tell with them, a company that can be brilliant when they seem bumbling and can be oblivious when they seem brilliant. We won't really know until the reveal and release of the Nintendo NX, but I think their recent first-party content and excellent DLC is the most concrete, optimistic example. Okay, that was a lot of rambling about Nintendo, and I feel like I'm just getting started, so make sure to check out wrongaboutEverything.ca tomorrow, which is April the 24th, a Friday, for a companion piece I'm going to write about the current state of Nintendo. For now, let me make a prediction that I have been thinking about since before Nintendo even announced the NX, although I guess I have no way of proving that. I believe that Nintendo's next handheld and console will be the same thing. I believe that the console's controllers will double as individual handheld systems, probably in conjunction with compatible alternate controllers as well. I also believe that the single-player Mario game that's going to be launching with the console is going to be a return to the castle. You heard it here first. Although, I hear that time is an illusion, so maybe you didn't hear it here first. But what do you think? Almost every gamer has a very strong opinion about Nintendo, and I certainly don't have all the answers. Like I said, I feel like I only scratched the surface here, so let's dive in deeper together. Let me know what I'm wrong about. Until then, see ya! Let's get out of here. Downtown Toronto is noisy, noisy, noisy. Downtown Toronto is full of noise. I'm the siren cat.